All right, welcome in everybody to the College Hoop News Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Tony Patelis. Tonight we have another weekly recap for you guys. We're about 3 weeks into the season now, so still very early, but still plenty to talk about. As usual, I have a guest with me tonight. Blake Lovell from SoutheastHoops.com joins me. This is Blake's second appearance on the podcast, so we're happy to have him back. Blake, how are you tonight?
Tony, doing well, my man. Yeah, excited to be back. It's a little bit going on in college basketball right now. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Yeah, we got a lot going on, especially in the SEC. I wanted to start off with that tonight. A lot of expectations this year. Me and you obviously really excited about the conference's off season. How do you think it's played out in the first few weeks? You think it's met expectations? Do you think it is looking to shape up like a really good league?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think and you've seen it. I mean, there's been a lot of games where the SEC's won a lot of good games, and I think that's something that's important. I mean, we look at Texas A&M really started it all with that game against West Virginia. Since then, a lot of teams have won against good competition, and that's kind of what we want to see from the SEC. The biggest thing, too, is you stay away from those bad losses. Now, up until maybe the past couple days, past 3 or 4 days, we really haven't seen any horrible losses. And still, even these ones, I mean, let's look at like the Ole Miss, South Dakota State. Is that a horrible loss? South Dakota State's a good team. They've got Mike Dahm. We know that. And then you look at kind of what happened to Arkansas at Houston. Losing that bad makes it kind of a really bad loss, but Houston's not a terrible team. And so I think the SEC, for the most part, has avoided those bad losses. And I think that's probably a good thing, especially since we're now in December, a couple weeks down. So,
absolutely. I think it all starts, obviously, with Texas A&M and Florida. They've been the most impressive. Kentucky is another team that, we still don't know much about. The competition hasn't been great. They did lose to Kansas in that game, but other than that, they really haven't played anybody really, really good yet. So we're kind of wait and see on Kentucky. But let's break down the SEC real quick, team by team, just a little quick breakdown. So give me your thoughts on Texas A&M. This team has been pretty much a buzzsaw early on. Really talented group, really good wins, obviously against USC and West Virginia. What are your thoughts on the Aggies early this season?
Well, they're good. And hey, I'll tell you who told me the Aggies were going to be really, really good, and that was you. But no, I think you and I were both on the same track. We were like, listen, this team certainly has all the pieces you need to be able to challenge for an SEC title, and we've already seen that. And one of the things I think has been kind of surprising is how well these freshmen have played. And because I think we focused in on all the guys they had coming back, but these freshmen have been really good. TJ Starks, JJ Chandler, those kind of guys are playing well so far. And obviously now they've got JJ Caldwell back to go along with all the other guys. That just gives them a lot of depth. And I think Texas A&M as a team, when you have that much depth, especially how you have guys like Tyler Davis and Robert Williams, knowing you're going to get pretty much every single night a double-double out of both of those guys, all that guard play is coming along, they're loaded. I mean, they're in really good shape.
To me, they have all the pieces. They have size up front with Davis and Williams. They have a point guard now, really good guards. They have a wing in DJ Hogue who can light it up. They have really good depth. So, they have all the pieces to win this conference. I think they might be the favorite outside of Florida.
Yeah, no, they definitely do. I mean, they have all the pieces you need, like you said, and I think they're getting better on the defensive end of the floor. They're more consistent. We're going to get this Arizona matchup, which is, I know, kind of one that maybe doesn't have the same kind of appeal it had 3 weeks ago, but still I think that tells us a lot about kind of where Texas A&M is at right now.
Absolutely. A team that I wanted to talk about real quick is Alabama. They lost today to a rough UCF team. A lot of injuries for the Knights this year. Wasn't a great loss in my opinion. They really didn't play well. They're 6-2 out of the gate. I know they're playing without Braxton Key, but it hasn't been all that pretty. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, it hasn't. And we even look at those past couple home games where, and again, these are teams where people are going to look at UT Arlington. They're going to look at Louisiana Tech and say, oh, well, it's just UT Arlington, Louisiana Tech. But no, these are two really good teams, So I'm with you. There's something that feels like it's a little bit off.
Right.
And I think maybe that's just not having Braxton Key. Maybe that's just still getting these freshman guys acclimated to the college game itself in terms of being able to know time and situation, all of those kind of things. Those are the minor things that is going to be able to take Alabama from being a good team to being a great team. And we talk about that with all these teams. And obviously, Colin Sexton I mean, let's look at today's game against UCF. That's probably not going to happen again. And so you throw that out against, like you said, UCF just, I mean, they were struggling. It's up until this point. Like, they just haven't played well. And so I think you look at that, and Alabama's going to be okay, but I want to see Braxton Key get back and kind of see how everything comes together with that.
Yeah, we're not going to know what this team is all about, I think, until he comes back. He might not be the best player on this team, but he's definitely the most valuable, in my opinion. I thought he was their best player last year. They would have been lost without him. So moving on, Blake, Florida, really impressive. That backcourt has been just absolutely crazy good early. Jalen Hudson is playing out of his mind. Kevon Allen, Chris Chiosa, just really, really talented group. They did lose to Duke. But no fault in that. What do you think about this Florida team? Because they're just absolutely relentless on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, and look, Igor Kulichov, we talked about him this offseason, but did we really think that he was going to be this good in terms of being able to step in right away, score 20-something plus points on a lot of nights? He's had a couple off games, but beyond that, you add him in there with Hudson, Kevon Allen. I mean, and I said this the other night, the thing about Florida is you legitimately feel like you have three guys on the roster in Allen, Kulichov, and Hudson that could score 30 points on any given night. Yeah. When you have those kind of offensive weapons, and then you have Chris Chiosa around that just in terms of pushing the pace and that type of stuff, I mean, I don't know how you stop this team when they're on. And we saw that against Duke. Duke couldn't stop them. For a large majority of that game, they couldn't stop them. Now, Florida's going to want those couple bad possessions back. You look at that, and we could be talking about Florida being the number 1 team in the country right now if they win that game. Once they get John Igbunu back, I think they're going to be in really good shape because that gives them another big body. Their freshmen are playing well. We talked about Texas A&M's freshmen. Florida's freshmen are playing very well so far. DeAndre Bauer has been very impressive. The sky's the limit for this Florida team because I love Mike White. I know you do. And it's just seeing how they've come along. They are just that business-like attitude type of team right now, and I think they're just going to get better from here.
Right. A couple more teams I wanted to just key on real quick, Blake, in the SEC, Mizzou. Now, I know Mizzou's coming off a really tough loss to West Virginia, but I feel like after the injury to Michael Porter Jr., getting to the Advocare final, I think they should feel pretty good about where they are, heading into this week. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And let's be honest here. They got the biggest monkey off their back in terms of ending that road losing streak when they won at UCF. And so I think getting that was a big sort of weight lifted off of them. How many of those players were around for it? Not a ton for that long losing streak, but the guys that were, just to get that out of the picture. And now you focus on, hey, we take this one game at a time. They have the talent. I mean, look at the big guys with Jonte Porter, Jeremiah Tillman. They have the talent to win a lot of games this year. It's just a matter of that guard play, the consistency. And, we talked about that all offseason. We knew what we were getting with Michael Porter Jr. and all that, how we expected things to play out in the front court. But it's just a matter of seeing how Terrence Phillips, Cassius Robertson, Blake Harris, all those guys, how consistent they are. If they continue to kind of stay consistent, can knock down shots, I mean, this team can battle with anybody in the SEC. It's just a matter of seeing if they're going to get that consistency on offense because I think they're a good defensive team. We just got to make sure they're going to be able to knock down shots on a consistent basis.
For sure. And the last team I wanted to mention is Arkansas. Now, Arkansas is a team that I think Arkansas is an NCAA tournament team. I think they're a pretty darn good club. But, that first week of the season, they shot the absolute lights out, and they're not going to do that all season long. So I think this week they've kind of come back down to earth a little bit. Still think they're an NCAA tournament team, and I don't think they're as good as they looked in that first week.
Well, they looked really good. If we looked at some of that competition and, we didn't have a good feel for where some of those teams were early on. They played teams like Sanford. They played Fresno State, but those kind of teams. We've learned more about each of those teams since then. But, yeah, I still think this is a team that's probably going to have games like we saw against Houston, and especially going to happen on the road. And I think we're going to see some of those games this year from Arkansas where they just flat out don't look good and where maybe Daniel Gafford isn't as impressive as he is. He's looked impressive in some of these games. I mean, he's been one of the biggest factors in that early season success so far. But there are still going to be games where he looks like a freshman. And I think that's where we're going to look at Arkansas and say, okay, if that happens, are they going to get production around him? And the problem is, I mean, look at Trey Thompson. I think looking at his stat line from yesterday, he didn't score. He played 20-something minutes. I think he had 2 or 3 rebounds. They're going to have more from those kind of guys if they're going to win a lot of games. We know what they're getting from Macon and Barford, Anton Beard, but they've got to have that, and that's still the thing we talked about coming into the season was about the front court, and there's still going to be some ups and downs, even though they look pretty good in some of these games so far.
Yeah, the kid I like that's kind of flown under the radar a little bit is C.J. Jones. He's given them a really good boost offensively. He looks like he could be a double-digit scorer in the near future for them.
Yeah, Mike Anderson talked about him coming into the season. He thought he would be a guy that kind of exploded into that role to where he could be someone that he turns to. And I'm with you. I think he could be one of those guys where if we see some of these other guys just simply not playing well, he gives them a boost. And look, Arkansas is athletic as it gets, and that's going to help them turn people over and get a lot of extra opportunities. So even if they're not playing great, just getting those extra scoring opportunities is going to give them a chance to be in a lot of games. But I'm with you. I was a little bit surprised just how that game played out at Houston.
Yeah, I wasn't very familiar with Daniel Gafford, but what a freak he is. He is just an athletic big. I mean, man, can he move? I mean, I'm really impressed with that kid. He's going to be pretty darn good.
He fits right in with what Mike Anderson wants to do. And that's just, we were talking about Moses Kingsley, and it's a hard player to replace. And we were kind of laughing about all the different things that were said. Well, he'd come right in, but listen, Gafford's played well, and you got to give him credit for that. Sure. And if he can continue to get better and better, I think they're going to be in good shape going forward.
All right. So let's move on here. Like a lot to talk about. So we had a very interesting situation yesterday with Cincinnati and Xavier. This is really, first of all, one of the more underrated rivalries in college basketball. I don't think it gets mentioned enough. It's a very extremely heated rivalry too. I mean, these two teams absolutely hate each other. J.P. McCura, he can be an instigator. He's a big talker. But as a coach, especially a head coach, don't you think, you shouldn't engage in that stuff? I mean, there's fault on both sides, but you never want to see stuff like this. I know frustration boils over sometimes, but I just don't think Mick Cronin handled it very well yesterday. I mean, like I said, fault on both sides. What's your take on this situation?
Yeah, it is a tough situation because I think for us, we look at just kind of like, well, on the outside, it's so hard to get yourself into something like that. It's like, ew, like, come on, like, don't do that. But then again, I think when you look at it, it's like, well, we're human nature. You look at the human nature part of it, and guys are always going to get riled up and stuff like that because, like you said, it's such a heated rivalry. And maybe people on the outside don't really understand that. Maybe the casual fan doesn't understand just how heated that rivalry is. Now, we look back at the brawl and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, that helps kind of understand what the fuel is to the fire there. But situations like that, I love good rivalries, okay? And if you get to the point to where you have a rivalry like that, where things get so heated, obviously you want it to kind of play out better than it did. But then again, I mean, it's just kind of one of those deals where it's human nature, and, you've got stuff like that going on. It's wild to see, but at the same time, it makes for some very interesting talking points, that's for sure.
I saw a few comments on Twitter yesterday, and I don't know if I agree with it, but do you think it might be better that they don't play anymore?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I understand. I get that point to where you want to avoid situations like this in the future. Again, given the history, given what happened, yesterday and that kind of stuff. But I mean, again, it's kind of one of those deals where you're going to have rivalries. You have rivalries within your conference. Obviously, not every rivalry carries that same sort of level of intensity, but stuff like this is probably going to happen. And I understand what people say about, well, these two teams specifically. But I do think you're going to see this kind of stuff just because sometimes emotions take over, especially when you have people that are so competitive, not just from a coaching standpoint, obviously players and all that. It's just a competitive situation. Unfortunately, things like this happen sometimes.
Yeah, the frustration level for Cincinnati's got to be pretty high because, Xavier's pretty much dominated this rivalry the last, I think they've won 7 or 8 out of the last 11 years. So that's got to be weighing in on the Bearcats, and Mick Cronin's probably not happy about that. So just a bad situation yesterday, but still fun for the fans.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it's something where you kind of get that built up, seeing how it's played out over the years. And unfortunately, stuff like that's going to happen. So,
yeah. So, all right. Well, we're about 3 weeks in, Blake. Not a huge sample size for teams, but who are maybe some clubs that have surprised you and maybe disappointed you at this?
Well, how about this? Virginia is a team that
I was going to mention them. Yeah.
I thought coming into the season, I said, I just think they're going to take a step back. And maybe it feels like we say that a lot sometimes just because maybe we lean more towards that style of play and like, well, at some point, they're going to have to take a step back. I truly thought they were going to take a step back this year and maybe be a notch below. But when you look at how they played thus far, and we know we all can look at that Wisconsin game and say, oh my, please don't give us more of these kind of games. But I still think they've looked pretty good, and that's a team that's gotten out to this kind of start, knowing how efficient they can be on both ends of the floor. Right. They're going to control the tempo. They're going to be able to kind of make you do what they want you to do, and I think that's what they've done thus far. I mean, look, being here in Nashville, seeing what they did to Vanderbilt. I mean, look at a game like that, and obviously Vanderbilt's had a slow start, but look at how they played in that game and just how they fared up there in Brooklyn. I've been impressed with Virginia. Another team I've been impressed with is SMU, because I think we looked at SMU and said, here's another team. You only had so many players come back. What was it, 3 or 4 players maybe from last year's team that came back? A 30-win team last year. So look at how they played thus far. We just saw them get the win over USC. Tim Jankovich is a guy that I've always been very high on. I think he's a fantastic coach, and maybe they're kind of flying under the radar. Maybe not so much now after that win over USC.
For sure. And now, who are some teams maybe that have disappointed, in your opinion?
Well, let's stay with USC for a second. And I know, Tony, I know how you feel about the Trojans, but I don't know. It just seems like they've kind of hit that stopping point for right now. It seems like they're not making that jump we expect them to make. And look, I mean, you look at their losses. They're not groundbreaking losses. Obviously you lose to Texas A&M, and like we mentioned, you lose to SMU, who's playing well. But maybe it just feels like they're another of those teams where they've got to find that extra something to be able to get to that next level where they want to be. If they want to be in that top 10, they want to be a Final Four team. And then, another team that's maybe been a little disappointing, and I think this is an obvious one. And let's just go ahead and stay with the Conference of Champions. But Arizona, I mean, obviously, you just look at how that whole thing's played out, and not having Raleigh Hawkins, we know, is a big deal. And then just seeing how they played thus far has obviously been surprising. Those are the 2 easy ones, probably, just because we looked at that conference and said Arizona and USC are the 2 teams. But we both know, too, that they have all the talent in the world, and they can easily turn things around pretty quickly.
Arizona is a team I'm not very worried about. Like you said, Alkins is not playing right now. They're playing a lot of freshmen too in big roles. So, you got to give them some time to get ready for conference play. But, they got a big win last night against UNLV. They have all the talent in the world. I just think they need to, fix a few things, and they'll be fine. I think in a few weeks they're going to be off and running. So Arizona is definitely not off to a great start, but I think they'll be okay. USC, I feel a little bit more worried about. But again, they're playing without DeAnthony Melton, who is one of the best defenders in the country and one of the best all-around players in college basketball. He does everything: steals, blocks, defense, everything. So he's definitely somebody that they need in that lineup. He's sitting out now because of the FBI investigation, apparently. So, and I think Wisconsin is another team. Yep. Now, they're a team that I thought would take a step back this year, but I didn't think they'd be this bad. Granted, we're only 8 games in or so, but they've really struggled, and I think they've shown that losing those seniors from last year has really hurt them.
Yeah, we talk about that experience too, and sometimes we always talk about the youth versus the experience, and we look at kind of how that plays a role. And Wisconsin was one of those teams, like you said, they had all that experience, and then the problem is, even when you have good talent, you don't ever really know how some of these guys are going to step into those really expanded roles. And are you going to be able to find guys that can become like the guy? Can they become that consistent player in these close kind of games? And I think that's what Wisconsin's running into right now, is just losing that experience, losing that leadership. Those have been, big things too. But you've said this, and I want to kind of repeat this as well. It's only the 1st of December, and I think people always need to remember that and say, hey, if your team is 3-5, whatever, 2-4, whatever they are, there's still plenty of time, because I think every coach in America will tell you that their team is nowhere near where they want them to be this time in 2 months, 3 months. So it's not panic mode yet, but there are some of these teams that are going to have to tweak some things if they want to be, where they want to go here in March.
Another team that I kind of compared to Wisconsin, because they lost so much experience, so much talent from last year, is Gonzaga. They lost, I think, 4 senior starters. A couple of the guys are in the NBA right now. I thought they would certainly kind of take a step back, but they look like a legitimate top 20 team, and I've been really impressed with Gonzaga out of the gate. What do you think about the Zags so far?
Yeah, I have too, and that's another one of those teams. Probably when we talked throughout the summer, we looked at it and said, "Hey, is it going to be them or is it going to be St. Mary's?" And I think you probably had a large majority said, "Well, this is finally the year of St. Mary's is going to be the better team," and it still could be. But I think right now, when we look at the way the Zags are playing, I mean, they have definitely exceeded expectations. Obviously, they played, and for my money, it's probably the game of the year so far against Florida. Probably a ton of people didn't get to see it because it was 1 or 2 in the morning, and we're all just groggy and don't really know what's going on. But it's a great game. But I think they have definitely kind of exceeded expectations, just like a team like Virginia we talked about. To me, and look, that just speaks to Mark Few's genius. I mean, he just continues to do it, and he has them rolling so far. And obviously, we know how they play. They're just going to get better and better as the season goes along. If they can avoid injuries and all that, which is what we talk about with all these good teams, they look pretty good right now.
Yeah, and I think you have to put St. Mary's on the disappointing list because losing those 2 games at the Wooden Legacy to Georgia and Washington State, who both still I don't think are very good teams. Now they're in big trouble because their non-conference schedule is not good, so they might have to run the table. Yeah. Or at least beat Gonzaga twice in WCC play to get into the tournament as an at-large.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of surprising the way they, like you said, how they played at the Wooden Legacy because, obviously as someone who covers the SEC too, Georgia's a team that really didn't look good early on. Now, they got a big road win yesterday at Marquette, but they still haven't looked great. And that was a team, where you thought if St. Mary's going to get kind of back on track, they need to beat Georgia and they'll be in good shape. But no, you worry about that. And like you said, with the scheduling, especially, I can remember you on Twitter, when the schedules came out, you're just like, oh my goodness, look at this St. Mary's schedule. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, you've got to find wins somewhere. Otherwise, once you get into WCC play, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself.
For sure. So moving on here, Blake, we want to talk about officiating next. Both of us have been very vocal on Twitter. I've seen you tweet out quite a few
times.
For years, yeah. But, what's your main issue with the officiating? Because for me, it's just the amount of fouls. Because at the PK 80, I tallied up the fouls. They averaged about 42 per game. That's just absolutely ludicrous. I mean, I think you probably have to agree with me. It's the off-ball fouls, Blake. It's the touch fouls. I think if we can get away from that a little bit, we'll be okay. But the officials just continue to be whistle happy and to destroy the flow of the game, and it's just been really frustrating early on.
Well, that's the biggest problem to me is flow of the game. And like you said, I mean, I can remember times last season, and I haven't done it so far this season, but I can remember times last season where I would sit here and watch a game, and I would just continue to look at the fouls, and it's like, oh, well, there's 55 fouls, there's 46 fouls. It's like, how is that possible? Like, because we know it's a physical game. We know that on every single possession, you could call a foul if you wanted to, like, because there's contact on every single possession. But at some point, this off the ball stuff that doesn't affect the play whatsoever. Right. And it's almost like everything is kind of being taken away. And what you're doing is you're putting the defense at a major disadvantage in a lot of different situations, it feels like. Because how do you play defense anymore? Because, it seems like it's so hard to do because the flow of the game gets stopped. You touch someone, it's a foul. And we know the NCAA, points of emphasis. We hear it every year. But at the same time, college basketball is still a sport where the bulk of your audience tunes in March, and elsewhere you're still trying to get people into the sport. Do you want them to watch a free throw contest to where the game is stopped every 2 minutes, or do you want them to watch the best players in the country do what they're best at? And I think the game just slows down so much. And again, we're trying so hard to eliminate contact when it's not possible to eliminate contact in a game like this where you have so many athletic players that you just can't limit it. But you have to be able to call the game. Completely understand that. Yeah. But you also can't call every single thing that happens.
Right. And I think that's what they do. And the official defenders will come to me and say, well, it all averages out in the end, and there's only so many fouls per game. Well, okay, but it's still not a good thing when there's 50 fouls in a basketball game and 45. And, again, I go back to the PK 80 and I just kept rounding, 45, 47, 52. It's just too much. And I think it's the flow of the basketball game. You're going to lose fans if it continues because people aren't going to want to watch, a foul every, 15 seconds. Every possession, there's a whistle. And it's just not fun.
No,
it doesn't make it fun for anybody.
No, and like I said, that's the biggest thing is the flow of the game. I mean, everybody can come with the numbers and say, oh, it's not this, not that. But when we already have all these extensive replays going on and we're doing all this now and we're adding all this in, it's just hard to keep that flow going. And so you have to kind of limit. And like I said, I understand you. If it's a foul, you got to call it. But at the same time, contact in and of itself is not always a foul. And I think that's kind of what we move toward is that any sort of contact, even if it's 15 feet away from the ball, hey, that's a foul. Yeah, not always.
Yeah. I think some of these reviews have been really brutal too.
Yeah.
Stopping the game for 2-3 minutes, and then we're all watching the replays at home and saying we can see what's happening.
Right.
What is taking so long to get these guys to make the right call? It's just these games turn into these long marathons, and it's just not good for anybody. So
well, and to me, that's one of the beauties about college basketball is think about the length of the game. I mean, most games are done in 2 hours, right? So, I mean, and look at other sports where football's football, but some of these games could last 3.5, 4 hours, 4.5 hours. You don't ever know. But with college basketball, it's like flow of the game is very important, just like with the NBA and that type of stuff. That's why we have, the lowered shot clocks and all that, because we want to be able to see motion,
Just a curiosity question for you, Blake. Do you think they will ever go to 4 quarters?
I don't know, because it's always an intriguing question, like you said, because you look at how the game is paced and you wonder about that, and that's maybe specifically with the fouls. They experimented with the reset of the fouls and all that. Like I think that was last year, wasn't it? And they tried that in some NIT games or something. I can't really remember off the top of my head, but experimenting with fouls, and maybe that's something that helps, but I don't know. I mean, you just wonder as the game moves more towards, it seems like trying to model it after the NBA to kind of hit that, knowing that a lot of players are going to go to that level. And then we're talking about one and done and all that kind of stuff changing. You do wonder how many more changes and maybe how drastic the changes are going to be to kind of parallel it to the NBA.
Yeah, I know the women's game has gone to 4, correct?
Yeah, right. So they're at that now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, next topic tonight. You're in this area of the country. Conference USA has been to me really impressive. Now, it's not a deep league. I know that, but the teams at the top, Middle Tennessee State, Western Kentucky, Louisiana Tech, UAB. I think those are 4 really, really good teams. Western Kentucky has wins over Purdue, SMU. I know Middle Tennessee State has beat really good Florida Gulf Coast team twice. La Tech won the Cancun Challenge. They almost beat Alabama. What do you think about this race in the Conference USA? It's going to be really fun.
Oh, it is going to be fun. And like you said, I mean, you look at a team like, Middle Tennessee, where we came into the season and said, well, they lost Ja'Cory Williams. They lost Reggie Upshaw.
Nick King has been great.
Exactly. We wonder how they're going to replace those guys. Nick King has been fabulous. Like he is averaging, I think it's 24.3 points per game. He scored at least 20 in every single game this year. I think he just scored 32 somewhere in there against Florida Gulf Coast last night. He has been fantastic. And I think you look at that, they obviously have Giddy Potts. I mean, they have other guys that are helping out. And Kermit Davis, we've talked about him many times, just how great of a coach he is and what he's been able to do. And, they've got some interesting games coming up. They got Vanderbilt and Ole Miss coming up. So those are 2 intriguing games to watch with them. Louisiana Tech, like you said, Eric Conkle, who I always think someone that's kind of been underrated, what he's done thus far at Louisiana Tech. Think about him taking over for Mike White. And that's an interesting situation there,
Louisiana Tech, I know that their fans are frustrated because they haven't got to the NCAA tournament in quite a while, but they're one of the more consistent programs in college basketball. I mean, they win 22, 25 games every year.
Yeah, and you think, like I said, you think about the flow just from the coach to coach. I mean, you go from that to now you have Conkle in there and what he's been able to do, and he's kept them right there, just in that mix. And UAB, we talked about too, going into the season, being a team with those guys. Obviously, you get the guy back, and you've got a lot of good pieces in place there, I think, if you're UAB. And then, like you said, I mean, you look elsewhere, there's a lot of intriguing teams in that conference. And And maybe that's one of those conferences where, like we talked about, you get some of these top power teams at the top going on the road in that conference. There's going to be a lot of close games. This could be one of the more competitive conferences probably in the country this year, and talking about just seeing those battles between those top teams.
Who would your favorite be? I know it's early, but who's the team that you really like out of the gate here?
Man, I'm telling you,
it's tough.
It is tough. And I'll tell you, I've been impressed with Louisiana Tech. I've liked the way they played, just seeing how they played at Alabama. But then again, if Nick King continues to be that force that he's been, he has looked like just a different player, obviously, than what he was. It's completely different.
he was extremely underwhelming at both Alabama and Memphis. And I said from day one of the offseason, I said, Nick King is the X factor for this Middle Tennessee State team. If he can play like he's capable of, I think they'll be pretty good. And he's been awesome, as you said.
Well, look at what Kermit Davis was able to do with Ja'Cory Williams when he came in there. And, we obviously saw how good he was when he was there. And now you get Nick King in there, same situation, coming over from a school in the SEC, and he's playing so well. And it's just, I don't know, if he keeps playing like that, like I said, knowing that team's tenacity, knowing the confidence level, maybe they're the team to beat, just because they still feel like they have all the pieces. Yeah.
And then real quick before we move on, Western Kentucky again had a really nice battle for Atlantis, beating Purdue and SMU, who just beat USC the other night. Does this team have a slim chance? And do you think, or should I say this, do you think this league could get an at-large bid, do you think, possibly?
I think it's possible, because we probably need to look, too, at some of these games these teams have left. You talk about Western Kentucky, who's a team that still plays at Wisconsin. They still have one of those games, and we talked about Wisconsin's struggles. How much is that win going to mean? We don't know yet, but there are still some intriguing games, like we talked about with MTSU. They've got Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, and there's just a lot of those different games. I think UAB still got Auburn on their non-conference schedule, and there are probably some other ones I can't think of off the top of my head, but there's still some opportunity. So if you get those kind of wins, you put yourself in good situations, and we've already seen what they've been able to accomplish so far. This could if you had to ask me, do I think this team is deserving of multiple bids? I don't think there's any doubt about it, because I think you could put three of these teams in there, and I think they all have a chance to win a first round game, because they're that loaded with talent. They all have very good coaches. But again, it's going to come down to the numbers, as it always does. But I do think there's a chance for them to get multiple teams in.
For sure. I think it's going to be one of the more exciting races in college basketball at the top. I'd love to see a little bit more depth in the league, but, Old Dominion's pretty good.
Right.
I thought UTEP would be pretty good this year, because they have some talent on that roster. Maybe they can turn things around, but it's been a really ugly start, especially that Tim Floyd retired out of nowhere after a game the other night. So
yeah, that's a weird situation. Yeah. So you didn't expect that. So
no, for sure. So just a couple more topics I wanted to hit with you, Blake, before we get out of here. I just talk real quick about Bryce Drew snagging these 2 5-star guys, Shitu and Garland. What a great job he's done. I thought it was a home run when they hired him last year. I thought, he would be a slam dunk at Vanderbilt. What are your thoughts on his recruiting job?
Well, I think even when they hired him, I don't think anyone could have looked at this and said, this is what's going to happen within the first 2 years. And to get to first get the best recruit in history, now he's got the 2 best recruits in history, and possibly add a third one in Romeo Langford, who, speculations everywhere. Where's he going to go? But, I don't know, man. If he gets all 3 of those guys, we're talking about Vanderbilt in that upper tier type of team next year, and seeing, kind of how the other players develop. Obviously, you've still got you can't just throw everyone in and say, oh, there's a national championship team. But it's unprecedented for Vanderbilt, and what he's been able to do in getting that type of talent here that wants to commit to Vanderbilt, and, obviously get the education, play at an SEC school. It's been amazing just to kind of see how he's been able to do that. And I think a lot of people continue to feel like, listen, this is just sort of the start. This isn't just one of those things where maybe this just happens this one recruiting class and then they go back to getting, 2-star or 3-star or whatever. Like, they feel like that Bryce Drew and his staff are so locked in on the recruiting trail. They have kind of the pitch you need to get these top players. I think the sky's the limit going forward for this program now.
Absolutely. I think he's doing a bang-up job, and just getting, that level talent is just not a normal thing at Vanderbilt. So.
No.
I thought, Kevin Stallings, I know he's got a lot of issues. People don't like him very much, but I thought he did a pretty good job, recruiting wise. I mean, he had some pretty talented kids throughout his tenure there.
Oh, yeah, no, they've got a lot of good talent that's come through here over the years. I mean, like you said, and for as long as he was here, I mean, he had a ton of good players come through here, players that went on to play in the NBA. It's just one of those situations, I think, where it was sort of needed, I think, for all parties to be able to do that. And now you're seeing, a different face come in Bryce Drew, and we talk about the recruiting and all that. It just kind of, gives your program a new personality, gives it a new direction. And definitely Bryce Drew's obviously taken advantage of that so far.
Absolutely. So, all right, last topic here, Blake. I just wanted to get your take. So we're 3 weeks in now. Who are your top 3 teams in college basketball for you?
Well, let's start with the one that, everyone doesn't like, but they have been so impressive. And Duke has just been, hey, man, they have completely impressed me. And I thought we all thought they'd be good because Marvin Bagley, adding him was such an important part to get him when they did. And he kind of changed the overall outlook. But Grayson Allen has been really good. I mean, he's been someone that I think has exceeded. We knew he could play at this level, but it was obviously that consistency that's kind of been the thing. Obviously we talk about the tripping incidents, all that kind of stuff. But just him playing at the level he's playing at, surrounding them with all these big bodies they've had, what a talented freshman class overall. Duke's been great. And so I would definitely put them as the number 1 team in the country. I think you probably have got to still put Kansas in there. I mean, I know Kansas is a team that maybe a lot of people wonder, and it seems like we say it every year, oh, this is the year that they finally get dethroned in the Big 12 and all this, and they could. But you look at what they've done thus far, though. Got a good win against Syracuse yesterday. Kentucky, they played well. And then that third team, I think it could go a lot of different ways. Michigan State's the team that I picked to win it all. If you had to ask me right now, they've been impressive. What they did to North Carolina, holding them to 45 points, was one of the more impressive things. Obviously, they're coming off a win against Notre Dame. But I'll tell you this too, Tony, right there behind them, and Villanova is another team that's obviously played very well too. But, to me, Florida and Texas A&M are right in that discussion because they've just been so impressive. And I think you could easily, in my opinion, if you said, hey, if you put Florida or Texas A&M up against Duke, whoever else, Duke, Kansas, and Villanova, Michigan State, whoever, we've already seen what Florida did against Duke. They had a chance to win the game, should have won the game. And then Texas A&M with all that size, with what they're doing, on both ends of the floor, I just think that's why the SEC has gotten so much better. And I guess to come full circle from where we started, you put those teams right there too, and you've got a great group of teams there at the top.
I know. I had the same exact group as you. I had Duke at number 1. They're 10-0. They have wins over Florida, Texas, Michigan State. They won on the road at Indiana, which is never easy. They just have maybe the most talented starting 5 in college basketball, and they've really showed it early on. Number 2, I had Kansas as well. The schedule hasn't been great, but, they're 7-0. They beat Kentucky, so I'm going to keep them there. They were there preseason, so you really can't bump them down that much. And then I had Michigan State at 3. Winning, crushing North Carolina was really impressive for me. And they lost to Duke in that first game of the year. You can't really fault them for that. They also have a really good win against Notre Dame. And then I had those other 2 teams in Villanova and Florida right behind them. I think you can make a case for the 3rd spot for Florida. I think you can make a case for Villanova as well. But I just think Michigan State has the best resume of the 3 so far. But again, Florida is the team that I think most impressed me over the first few weeks of the season because just I just have one word for them. They're relentless.
Yeah.
On both ends of the floor.
See, and it's interesting because I think coming into the season, if you would have asked me in that top tier in the SEC, Kentucky, Florida, Texas A&M, let's say those are the 3 top teams. If you would have asked me which team I thought may have underwhelmed, I probably would have said Florida because knowing what they lost last year, knowing that Igbunu's out until January, I wasn't sure how Kulachov and Hudson would factor in, but my goodness, they have been so impressive. And to get that from them, knowing they're going to get that going forward, they're a Final Four type of team. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, for sure. Mike White, I think, is a driving factor in this. I mean, just the way they play and they're just awesome. I mean, they're so fun to watch. I mean, too. I mean, you cannot miss a Florida game. The way they shoot the basketball, that backcourt has just been tremendous. So, who's a better team, Texas A&M or Florida?
I've been asked that about 10 times the past week. I'll tell you this. I've gone back and forth on it, but I'm going to stick with Florida. I just think that with the way they score the ball, now, if here's the thing. They're both different because Florida's strengths are their guards. Texas A&M strengths are their bigs. So, that matchup together, like I told you, I think I told you this last week or the week before, I wish they played tomorrow because I would love to see that matchup. But I'm going to stick with Florida just because they have that ability to shoot the ball the way they do.
Yeah, I want to give you credit because I remember in the SEC preview we did, you said this could be the year where Kentucky finishes third or fourth in the SEC. And I think you're right. I think A&M and Florida have clearly shown right now, it's still very early, that they're the two best teams in the conference.
Yeah, no, I would put them a little bit of a notch above Kentucky. And even in seeing that Kentucky's won every other game but that Kansas game, it's still a team that's learning. But right now at this stage of the season, I think Florida and Texas A&M are obviously further along. And then we'll see how Kentucky continues to progress and build that chemistry.
Exactly. Yeah. Anytime somebody asks me about Kentucky, I kind of say we're not going to see the best of what they have until, at least late December, early January.
Yeah,
they're just so young and they're just learning on the job pretty much because they have pretty much no experience. So
yeah.
Again, the SEC is really exciting. So that's going to wrap it up for tonight. Another weekly recap edition of the College Hoop News Podcast. Blake, I really appreciate you coming on. You have anything coming up this week for podcasts or anything?
Probably. You know me. I've probably got a lot going on. But no, on the March and Madness podcast, actually, we've got Chris Beard coming on Monday or Tuesday. So that'll be a good interview. Texas Tech, probably one of those teams we could have thrown in there too, how well they're playing. So you got that. And then obviously, if you want the SEC stuff, southeasthoops.com, check that out.
And how's the radio show going so far?
Hey, we started the radio show, and we had a great interview with Will Wade. So that's a good one, too. Awesome. You can find that. I'll have that on the Twitter on the Southeast Hoop. So, yeah, check that out.
All right, Blake, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll talk to everybody next week. See you later.